Welcome to this version of LPAC Shorts. We're joined again by Brian Lance, economist and longtime associate of Lyndon LaRouche, who's done a lot of work researching the economy over the years, and especially the current state of the crisis in the United States. And we started this series last time with a discussion about the infrastructure, and Brian was good enough to explain to us why the infrastructure bill that's being ushered through the Senate by Biden and even these knucklehead Republicans who are going along with it doesn't work, complete disaster, and the alternatives to it that are coming out of the Republicans don't mean anything either. So you've got the Democrats going in a crazy way and the Republicans seeming to enjoy the craziness of the Republicans. And Brian laid out exactly what the direction we have to go. We ended the discussion that really in fundamental principles, it has to be based on a conception of the future. And we do have an example in the United States. We have many actually, but the most recent one is the example of what happened at the after World War II and going into the 60s and mid 70s with the space program. And as an example of a type of infrastructure project that completely transformed the whole economy. So Brian, why don't you explain to us how that is the right type of infrastructure project we should be looking at right now?
Yeah, glad to. Good to be back, Bruce. Well, you've got to build a new platform. As we mentioned last week, briefly, not just the same old, we got to go to a new platform. As Mr. LaRouche emphasized over and over, you know, you're either progressing, developing new resources, or you're going backwards. There's no standing still. And we have to look at this from the standpoint of what mankind is going to need in the future, or specifically what our nation is going to need in the near future, but also, you know, a generation two down the line, because that's what we build now, should be building now, is for them. So the space program is a science driver. It spins off technology. It's doing so right now in the context of Artemis. NASA continues to do that. And then that works its way into the whole economy, and it transforms the whole economy. And I'm giving the shorthand version here, but that's the process, and that's what we have to generate.
Well, can you describe a little more in detail about what happened? Because one of the interesting things about the space program, which LaRouche pointed to, is that it had an effect on increasing the productive powers of labor throughout the entire economy. Oftentimes people sort of reduce that to saying, well, we got all these new products out of it, like Teflon and Tang and these.
Teflon.
Yeah, and we did, and we got a lot of new technologies which were used in medical research and so on and so forth. But there's sort of another side to this, which is really on a higher level, which is how it sort of had the effect of increasing the productive power of the entire economy, both in terms of physical terms, but also in terms of intellectual terms. So give us a little specifics about that.
All right, well, let's maybe the best way to do that is to go to some examples.
Sure, good idea.
All right, I mean, just to take a few, NASA started doing work on lasers, lasers for communication. We all know fiber optics, but for communications between here and the moon or Mars, lasers would be the most efficient way to communicate utilizing light, the same principle as fiber optics, really.
Right.
But well, the leading company that spun off of that work is a little company down in San Jose, California. It's named Polar Oinks, and otherwise spin off laser femto that are being utilized in fusion research. They're used in industrial machining, a broad array of uses. These very fast, ultra high speed lasers. So that's a single example. You have on the space shuttle, of course, you have you have an array, hundreds of research projects going on there at any one time. You have the research in nanotechnology. Just to use a specific example, alloys, super alloys that involve tungsten and niobium and others, special elements, can be produced on the space station. They have a lot of, again, utilization. Super alloys are used in turbines for nuclear power plants, but gas-powered turbines, other uses as well. They can be produced in the microgravity of the space station. An example closer to Earth for gearheads that might be out there, cars, people who love cars. There's a material called Tribotex that uses nanoparticles, which utilized in an engine reverses the wear and tear on a gasoline-powered engine, and it's now out there for sale. It was a spinoff of NASA. It uses nanoflakes that seek out friction and removes friction. So these are just some of the multitude of applications that have come along. But the centerpiece of it, as you know, is creativity. You have to spark, we have to spark continually human creativity on the very frontiers of knowledge. And those new breakthroughs lead to the creation of new prototypes. They lead to cultural advances in culture, meaning music, the arts generally. It diffuses out an optimism, but an optimism that is increasingly enriched. And that then comes down through the machine tool and production process and the manufacturing. It creates a world around us, a new world around us. And we've got to reindustrialize to take advantage of that.
That's extremely important because we all know that in terms of the NASA, the Apollo project,
yeah.
It involved hundreds of thousands of people directly in the Apollo project, many of whom came from not scientific backgrounds or ordinary backgrounds, like a lot of the people in Alabama, which was a relatively depressed part of the economy. And they were immediately assimilated into some of the most advanced technologies and also organizational processes, organizing scientific research programs and development projects.
Yeah, I think we've all met some of those people. Yeah.
Right. And in terms of, and even beyond that, the general effect on the entire population of seeing this kind of project and being involved in it, as you mentioned, created optimism and sparked creativity throughout the population. One thing I think is really important to see is that there were similar complaints back at the time, which unfortunately were ultimately prevailed, said, why should we be spending all this money and resources to go to the moon when we got all these problems here on Earth? And you see that same mentality with the whole Biden collectives and Malthusian zero growth economic policies. And LaRouche hit on this very much, that the shift in the economy, it determines in how you create a shift in the human mind. So getting back to what we originally started with, if you look at the Biden infrastructure and the Republican opposition to it, you see that it has the effect of decreasing the productive powers of labor.
Right, you're wasting productivity, you're wasting human lives.
Like yes. Biden's talking about taking people who were very productive, example in the oil field, and having these same people be solar power technicians, or even capping oil wells, which is kind of ridiculous, right?
Yes.
And these kinds of things. I don't know if you have other examples of that kind of degeneration.
Well, yeah, again and again and again, it's happened. I mean, we remember the yuppies. I mean, there was the yuppies, then there was the buppies, and so on and so on. Now we got the NIMBYs, and people running away, and so they're running away into these little cubby holes or cupboards and fetishizing various things. You know, whether it's you know a jogging obsession or some people just travel from hotel to a hotel these days. I mean, rather than this kind of running away, we need to run towards the problem, and that's where science has always been. It's always created the opportunities from the labs right down to the shop floor. I think if people remember these examples, workers used to come home and go to their workbench at home in the evening and work on a problem they were trying to solve back in the plant, in the manufacturing plant. And maybe he brought over a neighbor or a coworker and said, "Hey, come on over, Joe. I want to work with you on this project." You know, and they would solve some problem, some technical problem, some machining problem, and they take it to the management. They take it to the company. This kind of process of discovery, of assimilation of new ideas, is the opposite of running away.
And it focused on actually producing new technologies, new ideas, new advances, which was pushing mankind and society as a whole into a higher domain of economic power, a greater power of man in and over nature, as opposed to the kind of ridiculous ideas like solar collectors and windmills and changing light bulbs and buildings and this kind of stuff, which if anything is a step backwards. Sorry. Okay, so last week you ticked off a whole series of areas like energy, transportation, manufacturing areas, the whole question of supply lines, which is a big thing in the news today. And how do we sort of unravel all the inefficiencies which have been brought into the economy by globalization and deindustrialization, and actually get back to an efficient organization of the economy so that we can do what we did in the space program, but even bigger and broader and across the board. And from the standpoint of the actual future. So what I like to do is end today, but in the future episodes of the short, we'll take each one of these things up separately and sort of do a comparison. You know, what would a future-oriented approach towards solving these kinds of problems versus the Stone Age approach that we're getting from our political leaders. So I thank you very much for joining us today, and we'll be back soon with the next version of LPAC Shorts.
All right, good, Bruce.